The polished marble of the entryway was cold, seeping through the thin soles of Elara's simple flats. Each of her 5 suitcases, packed with brutal efficiency by a maid who refused to meet her eye, stood like a tombstone marking the end of a life. Chloe, her husband's mistress, held the grand oak door open, a gesture not of courtesy, but of expulsion. A smug, triumphant smile played on her lips, a stark slash of crimson in the morning light. "The car is waiting, darling." Chloe's voice was syrupy, laced with a poison Elara could almost taste. "Don't make this any harder than it has to be." Behind Chloe, Julian stood silhouetted against the vast, sunlit windows of the home they had once called theirs. He wouldn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He was a statue of cowardice, carved from the expensive marble of his inheritance. From an upstairs window, Elara could feel the cold, appraising stare of his mother, Beatrice. It was a stare she had grown accustomed to, one that measured her and always found her wanting. Elara's hands, resting on the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy, were steady. She did not tremble. She did not weep. Her mind, a place they could not touch, was unnervingly calm, an ocean floor undisturbed by the tempest on the surface. Her gaze took in the details with the cool precision of the architect she was. The absurdly expensive Patek Philippe on Chloe's wrist, a birthday gift Elara knew Julian had bought her last week. The way her own worn luggage seemed to shrink in the cavernous, opulent space, a visual confirmation of her supposed inadequacy. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor in Julian's hand as he pretended to adjust his cufflink. They thought this was her end. They saw a quiet, provincial girl, a nobody from nowhere who had been foolish enough to believe a billionaire's son could love her for herself. They saw a woman broken, discarded, with no resources and no recourse. They saw a victory. But as her hands slipped into the pocket of her simple wool coat, her fingers closed around a small, heavy piece of iron. It was a key, old, unadorned, and cool to the touch. It was a key to a world they couldn't conceive of, a symbol of a foundation far deeper and more solid than the Sterling family's generational wealth. They saw a victim. They didn't see the architect who was about to bring their gilded house down. They thought she was a provincial nobody, a simple girl swept up by a billionaire's son. They didn't know about the key in her pocket or the empire it represented. Within 24 hours, the foundation of their world would crack, and they would be the ones begging. Elara finally looked at Chloe, her expression unreadable. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you for your concern, Chloe," she said, her voice even and clear, carrying no trace of the hysteria they so clearly expected. She walked past them, head held high, and did not look back at the closing door. The sound of the heavy lock clicking into place was not an ending. It was a beginning. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this story. It's a powerful one, and we're so glad to have you here to experience it with us. Where are you watching from tonight? Let us know in the comments. We love seeing how far our stories travel, from bustling cities to quiet towns. It really builds a sense of community. Now, let's get back to it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy what you see. Your support means we can keep bringing you stories like this one. The car was a sleek black sedan, as impersonal as the driver who held the door for her. He loaded her bags with practiced indifference, his movements economical and detached. The pity was in his eyes, though, a fleeting glance in the rearview mirror as she settled into the cold leather. It was a gentle, well-meaning pity, but it was a humiliation all the same. Another small cut in a day of 1,000 cuts. The instructions were clear. Take her to a prepaid room at the Meridian Grand Hotel, a place respectable enough to avoid a scene, but a clear and brutal downgrade from the life she was leaving. As the car pulled away from the curb, the magnificent stone facade of the Sterling mansion receded in the window. Elara didn't watch it go. Instead, she looked forward, through the windshield, at the blur of the city. Her mind was already at work, not dwelling on the pain, but assessing the structure of her situation. She was an architect of spaces, but also of plans. And for the last year, as the cracks in her marriage had begun to show, she had been quietly, methodically drafting a new blueprint. She had met Julian Sterling 2 years ago. She was a junior architect at a small, boutique firm, overseeing the renovation of a historic library. He'd been on the library's fundraising board, a token position for a man of his family's stature. He was charmed, he'd said, by her passion. He was fascinated that she knew more about cantilevered beams and stress tolerances than she did about the Sterling family's stock portfolio. She didn't fawn over him. She didn't care about his last name. She cared about the integrity of the building. He found her, he'd whispered on their third date, refreshingly real. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of seeming sincerity. He spoke of building a life together, a true partnership, away from the stifling expectations of his family. He loved her designs, her vision for creating spaces that were both beautiful and humane. He promised her a world where her talent could flourish, unburdened by the politics of his corporate empire. She had believed him. She had fallen in love, not with the billionaire's son, but with the man who claimed he wanted to escape that gilded cage. The cage, it turned out, was his natural habitat. Once the wedding rings were on their fingers, the poison began to seep in. It came primarily from his mother, Beatrice Sterling, a woman who viewed the world as a rigid hierarchy, with her family perched firmly at the top. Ilara, with her quiet demeanor, her simple background, and her insistence on continuing her career, was an anomaly Beatrice could not tolerate. She was not a Sterling wife. She didn't chair the right charities, wear the right jewels, or cultivate the right friends. She was, in Beatrice's cutting parlance, a charming little project of Julian's that had gone on for far too long. Julian, who had once admired Ilara's independence, began to see it through his mother's eyes, as a stubborn refusal to assimilate. Her quiet confidence became aloofness. Her focus on her work became a neglect of her social duties. Slowly, methodically, Beatrice, in the gravitational pull of his own upbringing, eroded the man she thought she knew, revealing the weaker, more pliable man underneath. Chloe was merely the final symptom of the disease, a woman who embodied everything Beatrice wanted in a daughter-in-law: pedigree, ambition of the right sort, and a ruthless understanding of social currency. The car glided to a halt in front of the hotel. The driver wordlessly retrieved her bags. As Ilara stepped onto the pavement, she felt a gentle flutter in her womb, a tiny, insistent kick. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that day. This was not about a house, or a man, or a family name. This was about the future she was carrying. And for that future, she would not be a victim. She would be the architect. She walked into the anonymous lobby, her back straight, her purpose clear. The first phase of demolition was complete. Now, it was time to build. Inside the Sterling mansion, the sound of a popping cork echoed in the grand foyer. Chloe laughed, a tinkling, artificial sound, as Julian poured 3 glasses of vintage champagne. Beatrice descended the main staircase. Her face, which had been a mask of cold disapproval moments before, now relaxed into a thin, satisfied smile. She took a crystal flute from her son, her eyes meeting Chloe's over the rim in a silent toast of female solidarity, the kind built on mutual ambition rather than affection. She didn't even fight, Chloe said, taking a delicate sip. She lounged against the massive marble fireplace, making herself at home in a space that had been Ilara's only hours ago. It was almost disappointing. I was prepared for tears, for a scene. Julian ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, the gesture of a man trying to convince himself. It's for the best. It was never going to work. She was never suited for this life. The words sounded rehearsed, a mantra he'd been repeating to soothe a conscience he barely possessed. She's too Simple. Simple is one word for it, Beatrice added, her voice crisp. Unambitious is another. A sterling wife should elevate the family name, not hide from it. You need a partner, Julian, not a project. She gave Chloe a pointedly approving look. Someone with the right background who understands what's at stake. The implication was clear. Chloe was a suitable placeholder, a tool to achieve an end, but even she was just another piece on Beatrice's board. Chloe, in her moment of triumph, was too arrogant to see it. They spoke of Alara in the past tense, as if she were a problem that had been neatly and permanently solved. They discussed the next steps with the cold pragmatism of a corporate merger. Julian's lawyer, a shark named Davies, had already been dispatched. Davies will have her sign the papers this afternoon, Julian said, refilling his glass. We're being very generous. A lump sum. Enough for her to find a nice little apartment somewhere and live comfortably. All she has to do is sign the NDA and disappear quietly. She'll sign, Beatrice said with absolute certainty. What choice does she have? She has nothing. No family of note, no resources. She came with nothing. She'll leave with a great deal more. She should be grateful. Their blindness was staggering. They had lived with Alara for 2 years and had never truly seen her. They saw her quietness as weakness, her humility as a lack of substance. They had never once asked about the family she spoke of with such quiet affection, dismissing them as simple country folk. They never questioned why a nobody architect had such a profound and innate understanding of complex structures and long-term strategy. They saw only what they wanted to see, a blank canvas onto which they could project their own narrative of superiority. Miles away, in the beige anonymity of room 1408 at the Meridian Grand, Ilara ignored the insistent buzzing of her phone. It would be Davies, or Julian, or perhaps even a minion of Beatrice's, eager to finalize her erasure. She didn't bother to check. She had moved the single, uncomfortable armchair to face the window, which overlooked not a grand park or a sweeping vista, but the brick wall of the adjacent building. She hadn't unpacked. The suitcases remained by the door, irrelevant. Instead, she had retrieved a slim, carbon fiber laptop from the bottom of her personal carry-all, a piece of technology far too advanced and expensive for the simple girl they imagined her to be. They had packed her clothes, but they hadn't touched her bag. A critical oversight. She placed the laptop on the small, scarred desk. Then, she took the old iron key from her pocket and set it down beside the machine. The key was a weight, a promise. It didn't open a house or a safe. It was a symbolic key, one given to her by her grandfather, the patriarch who had started it all. It was the key to the first warehouse he ever bought, a humble beginning to a global logistics empire. It was a reminder, never forget the foundation. Ilara opened the laptop. The screen glowed to life, showing not social media or emails, but a secure, encrypted interface displaying complex financial data and project management charts. She navigated with a few swift keystrokes to a secure communication line. She dialed a number from memory. It rang once. A man's calm, familiar voice answered immediately. Ilara. Marcus, she said, her own voice steady, a perfect mirror of his calm. It's time. There was no surprise on the other end of the line, just a quiet affirmation. We're ready. Liam is with me. The jet is fueled. What are your instructions? Execute the Phoenix contingency, Ilara said, her eyes fixed on the brick wall outside her window. All phases. And Marcus, show no mercy. Mercy, her brother's voice replied, with a sudden hard edge, was forfeited the moment they laid a hand on you. The line went dead. Ilara closed the laptop. She leaned back in the chair, placing a hand on her belly. The first tremor had been sent through the foundations of the House of Sterling. They just hadn't felt it yet. The next morning, a sharp rap on the door of room 1408 announced the arrival of Julian's will. Arthur Davies was a man who wore his expensive suit like armor and his condescension like a fine cologne. He was tall, silver-haired, and possessed a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He entered the room with the swagger of a man who had never lost a negotiation against someone he considered an inferior. He expected to find a distraught, weeping woman, desperate for any crumb of security he was authorized to offer. He found Alara sitting in the armchair by the window, a cup of tea steaming on the sill beside her. She was dressed in simple slacks and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked not like a victim, but like a CEO about to hear a junior associate's pitch. The complete absence of emotional disarray was the first thing that threw him off balance. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his tone oozing a practiced, insincere sympathy. He placed his fine leather briefcase on the desk and clicked it open. "Or, soon to be Ms. Vance again, I suppose. I'm here to make this difficult process as smooth and painless as possible." "I'm sure you are, Mr. Davies," Alara replied, her voice neutral. She gestured towards the documents he was pulling from the briefcase. "Are those the papers?" "They are," he said, regaining his footing. "A divorce petition and a standard non-disclosure agreement. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, the Sterling family values their privacy. In exchange for your full and prompt cooperation, they are prepared to be very generous." He slid a document across the desk, his finger tapping on the settlement figure. It was a substantial number, enough to seem magnanimous to an outsider, but Alara knew it was a pittance, less than 1% of what Julian had spent on his art collection the previous year. She didn't get up. "Please, bring them here." Slightly annoyed at being commanded, Davies brought the folder to her. She took it and began to read. He had expected her to glance at the sum and either gasp in gratitude or burst into tears of indignation. Instead, she ignored the number completely. Her eyes scanned the text with a focused, analytical speed that was deeply unsettling. She wasn't reading like a spurned wife. She was reviewing it like a seasoned corporate lawyer. Her brow furrowed slightly, not in sadness, but in critical assessment of the clauses, the definitions, the liabilities. After several minutes of profound and unnerving silence, she looked up at him. Her gaze was direct and clear. "This is unacceptable, Mr. Davies." Davies allowed himself a small, world-weary sigh. Here it comes, he thought, the haggling. "Ms. Vance, I can assure you this is a more than generous offer. It is, in fact, the final offer." "Oh, I'm not talking about the money," Alara said, and the placid certainty in her voice sent a genuine chill down his spine. "The money is irrelevant. I'm talking about the fundamental premise of this entire document. It assumes a dynamic of power that simply does not exist." She handed the folder back to him. "This will not be necessary." Davies was speechless. He stared at her, his well-rehearsed script utterly useless. I don't understand." "You will," she said calmly. "I will have my own legal counsel contact you. They will be in touch with your office to schedule a meeting with you and the Sterling Enterprises Board of Directors. I would clear your calendar for this afternoon if I were you." "My legal counsel? The board?" he stammered, completely wrong-footed. "This is a personal matter, a divorce." "It stopped being a personal matter yesterday morning, Mr. Davies," Alara said, her voice dropping a fraction, gaining a new weight. "It is now a corporate matter. A very, very significant corporate matter." She turned her gaze back to the window, a clear dismissal. "You may see yourself out." Arthur Davies, a man who prided himself on his ability to read and control any situation, found himself backing out of the room, the heavy folder feeling flimsy and ridiculous in his hand. He was utterly bewildered. He hurried down the hallway, fumbling for his phone. He called Julian immediately. "She's refusing to sign," he said, the moment Julian answered. "What? Is she demanding more money?" Julian's voice was laced with irritation. "I knew it. Just give her another 100,000. Whatever it takes to make her go away. No, you don't understand, Davy said, his voice tight with confusion. She said the money is irrelevant. She said her lawyers would be in touch with the board. She was calm, in control. Julian, something is wrong here. It feels wrong. She's bluffing, Julian scoffed, though a seed of unease had been planted. She's putting on a brave face. She has nothing, Davies. Nobody. She'll crumble. Give her a day. He hung up, leaving Davies standing in the hotel lobby, a profound sense of dread settling over him. He had looked into Elara Vance's eyes and seen not a bluff, but a checkmate he couldn't yet comprehend. Up in room 1408, Elara ordered a simple club sandwich and a glass of milk from room service. She ate slowly, methodically, watching the shadows lengthen on the brick wall outside. She felt the baby kick again, a strong, reassuring thump. She was not alone. She was not weak. She was a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon, a quiet, patient tempest about to make landfall. The main boardroom of Sterling Enterprises was an exercise in corporate intimidation. Perched on the 50th floor, it offered a panoramic view of the city, a daily reminder to all within it of their power and influence. The table was a single, massive slab of polished obsidian, reflecting the stern faces of the board members. At its head sat Julian Sterling, flanked by his mother Beatrice. Today's meeting was critical. They were there to finalize the financing for the company's most ambitious project to date, the Phoenix Spire. The Phoenix Spire was to be the crown jewel of the Sterling legacy, a breathtakingly innovative, mixed-use skyscraper that would reshape the city's skyline. It was a project of immense scale and even greater ego. Beatrice saw it as the monument that would cement the Sterling name for another century. Julian saw it as his chance to finally step out of his father's shadow. He was trying to focus on the presentation by the CFO, but his mind kept drifting. Davies's phone call had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Elara's behavior was off, illogical. He'd expected hysterics, pleading. This cold, strategic silence was unnerving. He dismissed it again as a desperate, amateurish bluff. Still, the distraction lingered, a persistent hum beneath the surface of the financial projections. Beatrice, ever perceptive to her son's moods, gave him a sharp, questioning look. He straightened up, forcing his attention back to the screen. The numbers were good. The investors were solid. The primary architectural firm, a highly respected but press-shy international group called Innovate Archon, had delivered a visionary design. The final piece was the land itself, which had been secured through a partnership with a silent, monstrously wealthy holding company known only as Vance Sovereign Group. Everything was aligned. It was then that the interruption came. The heavy boardroom door opened a crack, and Julian's executive assistant, a young woman named Clara, peered in, her face pale and anxious. "Forgive me, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Boardroom interruptions were a cardinal sin at Sterling Enterprises. "There are two gentlemen here to see you. They insist it's a matter of extreme urgency." Julian's annoyance flared. "I'm in a meeting, Clara. Tell them to make an appointment." "I tried, sir," she stammered. "They wouldn't give me their names at first. They just said to tell you they were here about Elara. Then they said to mention the Phoenix Spire project." The name Elara hung in the air, instantly souring the atmosphere. Beatrice's lips thinned into a line of displeasure. "Elara? What about her? Has she sent someone to beg?" Julian sighed, exasperated. "Who are they, Clara?" Clara swallowed hard, her eyes wide. "They said their names are Mr. Liam Vance and Mr. Marcus Vance." The name Vance registered with Julian, but only in the context of Elara's maiden name. It meant nothing to him. "Vance? Like Elara?" he asked, confused. He looked at his mother, who scoffed audibly. Her hick relatives from the countryside, no doubt. Beatrice said with disdain, loud enough for the entire board to hear. Come to plead her case. How utterly pedestrian. Get rid of them, Julian. Tell security to escort them out. But Clara wasn't moving. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Sir, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That's not all. After they gave me their names, I recognized the holding company for the Spire project. Vance Sovereign Group. She took a shaky breath. And I checked the file on the architectural firm Innovate Archon. The majority shareholders are a Liam and Marcus Vance. They own the land, sir, and they own the architects. The statement landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. The CFO's presentation froze on the screen. The board members, who had been looking bored and irritated, now sat bolt upright, their faces a mixture of confusion and sudden, dawning horror. The air crackled with tension. Julian stared at his assistant, his mind refusing to process the information. Vance Sovereign Group. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be. Before he could form a response, the boardroom door swung open fully. Two men stood in the doorway. They were not the simple, rustic figures Beatrice had imagined. They were tall, dressed in exquisitely tailored dark suits that spoke of quiet, generational wealth, not flashy new money. The one on the left, Liam, had sharp, intense eyes and an air of coiled energy, like a predator at rest. The one on the right, Marcus, was calmer, his expression analytical, but he radiated an authority that was absolute and unnerving. They looked from Clara to the stunned faces around the obsidian table. Marcus, the calmer of the two, took a step forward. His gaze swept over the board members, deliberately skipping over Julian and Beatrice, as if they were irrelevant fixtures in the room. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it commanded the attention of everyone present. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone polite but edged with steel. My apologies for the interruption. I am Marcus Vance, and this is my brother Liam. We are the principals of the Vance Sovereign Group. The name now attached to the formidable man standing before them sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. Whispers broke out among the board members. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Beatrice stared, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. As you are now aware, Marcus continued, his eyes finally settling on the panicked CFO, we are the primary investment partners in the Phoenix Spire development, and our firm, Innovate Archon, holds the design contract. We are here to discuss a material change in our partnership with Sterling Enterprises. Liam, who had been silent until now, took a step forward. His focus was not on the board. It was aimed directly at Julian, a laser of pure, cold fury. But first, he said, his voice low and dangerous, we're here about our sister. The word sister detonated in the silent room. Julian felt his breath catch in his throat. Sister. It wasn't a coincidence. The carefully constructed walls of his world began to tremble. Your sister? One of the older board members, a man named Henderson, asked, his voice shaky. Marcus nodded, his expression unyielding. Our younger sister, Elara Vance. Perhaps you know her by her married name, Sterling. A name she will, thankfully, not be burdened with for much longer. He let that sink in. The implications were catastrophic, and every single person in that room, with the exception of the still reeling Julian and Beatrice, understood it instantly. Their legacy project, the multi-billion-dollar venture upon which the future of Sterling Enterprises rested, was entirely dependent on the family of the woman their CEO had just thrown out on the street. Our family has for generations preferred to build our wealth quietly, Marcus explained, his voice a calm counterpoint to the rising panic in the room. We have little interest in the society pages or the public spectacle of wealth. We built our success in global logistics, then diversified into technology and private equity. We value privacy and integrity above all. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room again. Ilara shares those values. She is also a truly brilliant architect, one who wanted to build a name for herself on the merits of her work alone, not on the reputation of her family. That is why, when she married your CEO, she did so as Ilara Vance, architect, not as Ilara Vance, heiress to one of the largest private fortunes on the continent. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Julian's life. He looked at his mother. Beatrice's face was a mask of disbelief, her skin a ghastly shade of white. The provincial nobody she had so openly despised, the unambitious girl who was a stain on the sterling name, was in fact from a family whose power dwarfed their own. Liam then took over, his focus remaining locked on Julian. His voice was devoid of the calm diplomacy his brother had shown. It was raw, personal, and utterly scathing. Our sister, Liam said, biting off each word, is the lead designer of the Phoenix Spire. It's her vision, her genius. You've all seen the plans. You've praised them. You've bet the future of your company on them. He took another step closer to the table, leaning forward slightly, his knuckles white as he rested them on the obsidian surface. A vision you were about to fund. A vision you are no longer worthy of. The shock in the boardroom curdled into outright panic. The board members, men and women who had built their careers on risk assessment, could see the abyss opening up before them. Their faces, which had shown sycophantic respect for Julian and Beatrice just minutes earlier, now turned to them with expressions of accusation and horror. This wasn't just a family drama. It was a corporate catastrophe of epic proportions. Julian finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. You can't do this. We have contracts. Agreements. Liam actually laughed, a short, harsh, humorless sound. Contracts? He pushed himself off the table and walked slowly around its perimeter, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the board. Let's talk about contracts, shall we, Mr. Sterling? My brother is the strategist. I'm the one who handles the details, the fine print. He stopped directly behind Julian's chair, forcing Julian to crane his neck to look up at him. Our legal team, which I assure you is considerably more thorough than yours, insisted on the inclusion of a number of specific clauses in our agreement with Sterling Enterprises. One in particular, Clause 34B. Are you familiar with it? Julian just stared, dumbfounded. He'd never read the full contract. He left that to underlings like Davies. No, I didn't think so, Liam continued, his voice a low growl. It's the moral turpitude clause, a standard in our agreements. It gives the Vance Sovereign Group the unilateral right to dissolve our partnership and withdraw all funding and associated intellectual property in the event of any action by a key principal of the partner company that is illegal, unethical, or brings our shared venture into public or private disrepute. He leaned down, his face now just inches from Julian's. Throwing your pregnant wife, our sister, out of her home to install your mistress is, by any definition, an act of profound moral turpitude. It brings you, your company, and by association our venture, into extreme disrepute. Wouldn't you agree? Beatrice, finally snapping out of her stupor, rose to her feet, her voice shrill with desperation. This is a family matter. It has nothing to do with business. You have no right to interfere. It was Marcus who answered her, his calm voice cutting through her hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. You are mistaken, Mrs. Sterling, he said from across the room. You made this a business matter the moment you decided our sister's worth was measured by her pedigree rather than her character. You made it a business matter when you fostered an environment where your son felt entitled to discard her like a corporate asset that was no longer performing to his expectations. He took a step toward her. And you made it our business when you caused her harm. There is nothing in this world we take more seriously than the well-being of our family. He then addressed the entire room. Therefore, effective immediately, the Vance Sovereign Group is invoking Clause 34B. We are pulling all funding from the Phoenix Spire project. Our architectural firm, Innovate Archon, is officially withdrawing. The intellectual property, the designs, the plans, they all revert to us. As of this moment, the Phoenix Spire project is dead. A collective gasp went through the room. Henderson, the senior board member, slammed his hand on the table. This will ruin us. The stock will collapse. We're over-leveraged. Marcus simply nodded. Those are consequences you should have considered. Just then, as if orchestrated by a master playwright, Julian's phone, sitting on the obsidian table, began to ring. The screen lit up with a picture of Chloe, smiling. Dazed, Julian answered it, putting it on speaker out of sheer, panicked reflex. Chloe's voice, shrill and hysterical, filled the silent room. Julian, what the hell is going on? My Amex was just declined at Cartier. They cut me off. The card is canceled. And the security chief at the house just called. He said he has new orders and the locks are being changed. He said I have 30 minutes to pack a bag and get out. What is happening? Liam smirked, a cold, brutal expression. He looked at Julian. Ah, yes, the house. He turned his attention to Beatrice, whose face had crumpled in on itself. You see, Mrs. Sterling, in our due diligence, we discovered that your family was somewhat over-leveraged. So we bought the debt, all of it. The mortgage on your mansion, the loans on your cars, the lines of credit. Your house, your cars, your assets, they're all ours now. And as the new owners, we've decided to make some changes. He looked back at Julian's phone, which was still broadcasting Chloe's frantic shrieks. Starting with the guest list. The scene in the boardroom dissolved into chaos. Board members were shouting, some at Julian, some into their phones at their brokers, trying to stem the bleeding that had already begun. The news would hit the market in minutes. Sterling Enterprises was about to be eviscerated. Julian sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the life he had chosen disintegrate in real time. Beatrice sank back into her chair, a broken woman, the architect of her own ruin. Her empire of appearances had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. Liam and Marcus watched the pandemonium for a moment, their faces grimly satisfied. Their work here was done. They turned and walked out of the room, leaving the Sterlings to drown in the wreckage they had created. While the Sterling empire imploded, Ilara was moving. She wasn't in the drab hotel room anymore. A discreet black car, sent by her brothers, had collected her. She was now in the penthouse apartment of a sleek, minimalist skyscraper that pierced the clouds. It was one of dozens of properties the Vance Sovereign Group owned in the city, a place of quiet, understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the metropolis below, including the distant, shining tower of Sterling Enterprises, where her former life was being dismantled. Her brothers were there. The moment she stepped out of the elevator, Liam and Marcus were there, their formidable public personas melting away to reveal the protective older siblings they were. There were no grand pronouncements, no "I told you so's." Liam simply wrapped her in a fierce, gentle hug, his hand resting protectively on the back of her head. Marcus placed a warm hand on her arm, his eyes searching hers for any sign of lasting pain. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, his voice soft. Ilara nodded, a genuine sense of peace settling over her for the first time in months. "I am now." They sat together in the spacious living room, furnished with modern classics in priceless, subtle art. The air was calm, a sanctuary from the storm they had just unleashed. They explained what she already knew, filling in the details. From the day she had announced her engagement to Julian Sterling, they had hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. They respected her desire to make her own way, to be loved for herself, but they were not naive. "We ran a full workup on him and his family," Liam said. his voice hard again as he spoke of Julian. We saw the weakness in him, the way he bent to his mother's will. We saw the financial overextension of their company, the obsession with image over substance. So we put a safety net in place, Marcus continued, his tone more measured. A silent one. We began acquiring their debt through shell corporations. We positioned our firm to win the architectural bid for their biggest project, knowing your talent would make it impossible for them to refuse. The Phoenix Spire was always your project, Alara. We just made sure that if things went wrong, you would hold all the cards. The key in her pocket had never been for a physical door. It was the key to this contingency, the signal that the walls of her quiet, independent life had been breached, and the full power of her family was required. It was a power she had never wanted to use, but one she was profoundly grateful for now. Back at the Sterling mansion, the chaos had subsided into a dead, echoing silence. The staff, from the head butler to the junior maids, had been politely but firmly dismissed. Their final paychecks, drawn from a Vance Sovereign Group account, had been generous. Their loyalty had been bought and transferred in a single afternoon. Julian and Beatrice were now alone in the vast, empty house, the silence amplifying the scale of their ruin. The electricity was still on, the water still ran, but it was no longer their home. They were ghosts haunting a place that had already moved on. The front door burst open and Chloe stormed in, her face a thunderous mask of rage. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her hair disheveled. She was dragging a single Louis Vuitton suitcase behind her. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "You are pathetic. You told me you were powerful. You told me you were in control. You're nothing. A fraud." Julian, who had been sitting numbly on the bottom step of the grand staircase, looked up at her with hollow eyes. "Chloe." "Don't you Chloe me," she spat. "I tied myself to you, to this family. For what? To be humiliated? To have my credit cards cut off like some commoner? To be thrown out by a pair of goons in suits?" She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "I can't believe I ever thought you were worth it. Her brothers, now they are powerful. I should have aimed for one of them." The words were a brutal, final stripping of all illusion. She had never loved him. She had loved his name, his money, his status, all the things that were now evaporating like mist. She turned her venom on Beatrice, who was standing rigid by the fireplace, her face ashen. "And you," Chloe sneered, "the great matriarch. You thought you were so clever, manipulating everyone. Look at you now, sitting in a house that isn't yours, with a son who has ruined everything. Enjoy your failure." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving her suitcase where it stood, and stormed back out the door, slamming it behind her. The sound echoed through the house, a final, definitive punctuation mark on the end of their world. Beatrice slowly sank onto a damask sofa, her body seeming to shrink. All her life she had worshipped at the altar of status, appearance, and pedigree. Now her idols had been smashed. She was forced to look at her son, not as the heir to a dynasty, but as a weak, foolish man who had single-handedly destroyed it. And in the merciless quiet of the empty mansion, she was forced to look at herself and the role she had played in nurturing that weakness. There was no one left to impress, no one left to command. There was only the truth, and it was devastating. A week passed. A week in which the name Sterling became synonymous with corporate implosion and public humiliation. The stock was worthless. The board had resigned en masse. The banks had called in loans that Julian and Beatrice could no longer pay. They were adrift. It was in this state of utter brokenness that Julian finally requested a meeting with Alara. He didn't call her directly. He went through the only channel available to him, Arthur Davies, the humbled lawyer, who in turn contacted the Vance Group's formidable legal team. A meeting was granted. The location was not a lavish penthouse or a grand office. It was a small, neutral meeting room in a downtown building owned by Alara's family. The room was minimalist. A simple table, 3 chairs, a pitcher of water. It was a space stripped of all power dynamics, designed for clarity. Julian was escorted in by a quiet man in a suit who was clearly part of Alara's security detail. The subtle display of her new reality was not lost on him. Ilara was already there, sitting at the table, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. She looked serene, healthy. The stress that had shadowed her features for months was gone. She was radiant, and the sight of her was like a physical blow to Julian. He began to speak before he even sat down, the words tumbling out in a desperate, disjointed torrent. Ilara, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I was a fool. I was weak. I let my mother, I let Chloe. I never should have. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, we can fix this. For the baby, for our family. I love you. I've always loved you. He was crying now, his shoulders shaking. It was a pathetic, wretched sight. Ilara listened patiently, her expression unchanged. She waited until his rambling apology petered out into ragged sobs. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to sit with the weight of his own words. This was the moment of the moral mirror, the point where the truth, unvarnished and undeniable, would be reflected back at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was not angry or vindictive. It was calm, clear, and carried the devastating weight of simple fact. No, Julian, she said softly, you don't love me. You love what I represent now. You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry for the consequences. There is a profound difference. He looked up, his tear-streaked face a mask of confusion. That's not true. Isn't it? She asked, her voice remaining gentle, which somehow made the words cut deeper. Let's be honest with each other, for the first time in a long time. You didn't value me when you thought I had nothing. You didn't respect my mind, only my appearance. You didn't defend my dignity. You allowed it to be stripped away piece by piece. Your apology today is worthless because it is contingent on my power, not my humanity. If my brothers hadn't intervened, you would be sitting in our home with your mistress, and I would be signing Mr. Davies's papers. We both know that is the truth. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze holding his. It was time for the list of grievances, delivered not as an attack, but as a diagnosis. You stood by silently while your mistress insulted me in my own home. You allowed your mother to systematically undermine our marriage from the very beginning, poisoning every happy moment with her disapproval. You broke the promise we made to each other, the promise of partnership, and then you threw me out of our home while I was carrying your child, and you sent your lawyer to buy my silence. You didn't do these things in a moment of passion or a fit of rage. You did them coldly, methodically, because you thought you held all the power and that you could get away with it. That is the truth you need to face, Julian. Your character was tested, and it failed completely. He had no response. There was nothing to say. Every word she spoke was an irrefutable fact. She stood up, the movement graceful despite her pregnancy. The meeting was over. Our child, she said, her voice firm, will know its father. You will have visitation rights, conditional on your good behavior and your commitment to your own recovery. But our marriage is over. The foundation is gone, Julian. There is nothing left to build on. She walked toward the door, then paused, her hand on the handle. She looked back at him one last time. You need to build a life on your own, a real one that has nothing to do with your mother's expectations or my family's money. You need to find out who you are when you have nothing. Maybe then, you'll become a man our child can one day respect. She opened the door and walked out, leaving him sitting alone at the table in the empty room, finally and completely understanding the immeasurable chasm between her strength and his own profound weakness. 6 months later, the late afternoon sun cast long golden rays across the polished floor of a stunning modern home, a marvel of glass, warm wood, and clean lines that seemed to float above a rugged coastal cliff. On a wide balcony overlooking the endless blue of the ocean, Alara sat in a comfortable chair, holding her newborn daughter. The baby, named Hope, slept peacefully in her arms, a tiny, perfect being oblivious to the storm her existence had weathered. The house was Alara's own creation. She had designed it from the ground up, a space that embodied her principles: strength, light, and an unbreakable connection to the natural world. It was not ostentatious or grand in the way the Sterling mansion had been. It was better. It was honest. In the city, the skyline was changing. The failed Phoenix Spire project had been reborn, under the full control of the Vance Sovereign Group, and with Alara as the celebrated lead architect, it was now rising as the Vance Tower. It was a testament not to ego, but to vision, a symbol of resilience and integrity that was already winning international acclaim. The lives of those who had wronged her had also been irrevocably altered. Julian, stripped of his inheritance and his family name's power, was working as a junior consultant at a small, anonymous financial firm. He had been forced to start over from nothing. He lived in a modest apartment downtown and drove a sensible car. He saw his daughter every other weekend, supervised for now. He was quieter, humbled. In his eyes there was the faintest spark of something new, the beginning of self-awareness, the first step on the long, arduous road to genuine change. Whether he would complete that journey remained to be seen, but the chance was his to take or squander. Beatrice Sterling now lived in a small, respectable condominium, having sold a mansion and all its contents to cover a fraction of the catastrophic debts. Her vast social circle, which had revolved around her power and status, had evaporated overnight. She was alone with her thoughts, a punishment more severe for her than any financial loss. Stripped of the appearances she had worshipped, she was forced into a quiet life of reflection, her days spent in a world devoid of the deference and admiration she had once commanded. It was a poetic, silent justice. Alara looked down at the tiny, sleeping face of her daughter. She felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the triumphant thrill of victory or the bitter satisfaction of revenge. It was the quiet, solid confidence of a woman who knew her own worth. She had weathered the hurricane and had emerged not unscathed, but stronger, rooted more deeply in the bedrock of her own character. She thought about strength. True strength wasn't about the power to dominate others, the wealth to command obedience, or the status to demand respect. It was quieter than that. It was the integrity to be true to yourself, the patience to withstand injustice without losing your dignity, and the courage to build a new future on a foundation of your own making. She had held on to her integrity when it would have been easier to surrender, and in the end, that had been her most powerful weapon and her greatest shield. The storm had passed, the sky was clear, and a new, beautiful life was just beginning. And so Alara built a new foundation, not on the ashes of her old life, but on the bedrock of her own integrity. A powerful reminder that true worth is not what others see in you, but what you know to be true about yourself. What did you think of Julian's consequences? Were they fair, or should he have faced a harsher reality? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. Thank you for being with us for this journey. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the power of quiet strength and the certainty of karma. We'll see you next time.